a panel. We decided to organize this to give you all a chance to find out more about life after graduation and possible career paths. My name is Caitlin Owusu, and I am on the PPE UAB. I'm joined by some of the members of the UAB.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Fleece. I am a junior on the PPE UAB as well, and I'll be helping to moderate this panel.
And I'm a senior on the UAB as well, and I help with the organization.
So at this time, we will hand over to our panelists and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. This meeting will be recorded to enable students who weren't able to join due to religious observances and other reasons. So please let us know if there's any issues. But yes, at this time, we'll hand over to our panelists. Yeah, so any one of you can jump in.
I can go first. Hi, I'm Julie Buxbaum. I am a novelist, which is sort of a strange path for a PPE major. And I'm the author of 10 books, some for adults, some for young adults, and some for middle grade readers. And I'm excited to be here.
Hi guys, Donald Cunningham, class of 2005. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a single family office based in London, although I happen to be in New York at the moment. I would say I had a bit more of kind of a war tonight track, and then I spent most of my career on Wall Street and then sort of moved into family office life thereafter. Happy to elaborate on that, and very nice to be hosted for this today. So thank you guys for organizing.
I'm happy to go next. Nora Fitzpatrick, PPE major, graduate with Julie, actually, 99. I have had probably kind of a career that you would think a PPE major has had. I've worked at the intersection of economics and public policy. I've had roles in state and local government, and spent the majority of my career at the Federal Reserve. Looking forward to talking.
I guess I'll go, I'll bring up the rear here. Eddie Mannheimer, I'm class of 2000. I'm very, very proud to have been a PP&E major. It was a great background to get. And I like to joke that when I finished college, none of the philosophy companies were hiring, so I went to law school. And I had a very short legal career prior to going back to business school and entering investment banking, which is where I've been for the past 15 years. I now head up M&A for power and utilities at Morgan Stanley, and I live in Scarsdale, New York, with my wife, 5 kids, and a cat.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. We're very happy to have you all here. So the way this panel will work is Caitlin and I will just moderate some questions that we've come up with, and then we'll also give the audience a chance to ask questions at the end. So to kick things off, could you all tell us why you chose to study PPE, and are you happy with that decision?
I guess I'll go first on this one. Part of the reason why I decided to do PPE was because I like variety and I didn't really want to have to make a very narrow choice. I knew it was a challenging major in terms of the number of credits required, but I also just found, political philosophy primarily to be extremely interesting. And so that was ultimately why I made the decision to do it. What was the second part? I forget.
Are you happy with your decision to major in PPE?
Extremely happy. Yeah, extremely happy. I mean, I think fundamentally, I view undergrad, even though I'm in finance and a lot of the people I work with, went to Wharton undergrad. I just think the undergraduate experience is sort of a missed opportunity if you don't take advantage of liberal arts. That's my own bias. And I feel like my life has been completely enriched having gone through PPE as a major.
So I'd agree with Eddie on that. I think, from my standpoint, I don't remember the specific rationale around choosing PPE. I think there was something about political economy in this kind of classic sense of a rounded liberal arts education that was always quite interesting to me. I would sort of echo that sentiment that it is a wasted opportunity to engage in a narrow field of study that precludes one from having to go about this process of, Socratic method and deductive reasoning. I think these are skills that are very transferable in any particular career. And I think this field embodies that quite well in the undergraduate curriculum. And I'm also quite happy with that. Certainly don't regret it. I think I met some of the most interesting people in those days of going through this who challenged my ability to think more critically, more rationally, more deductively. And that was a great exercise. And I think that has been quite applicable throughout my career, whether that was very financially heavy or intense in the banking days, or to sort of more of the soft skills that I apply these days in family office life.
I can go next. For me, I am exceptionally cheap. And so I really love the idea of 3 for the price of 1. And I love the idea of exploring lots of different topics and not having to pick a singular focus. And so that's why I went to PPE. And then from there, my original plan was law school and to become a lawyer. So from Penn, I went to Harvard Law School, and then I practiced for 4 or 5 years as a lawyer. And I do think my years in law school and my years studying PPE have actually incredibly helped my writing. As the anomaly on this panel, I feel like it's important to show that PPE can lead you anywhere. And I do believe I use, my understanding of economics, political philosophy in my writing. Even when I'm writing for children, I find that it helps to sort of understand the world and be able to categorize it in different ways.
Similar to what others have said, I always liked it, the interdisciplinary approach. I liked that Penn had across different majors that type of approach, both in the sciences, and then I liked in particular this opportunity to do PPE. I guess I always think that political science influences the economics, and philosophy always, is kind of at the core of economics and at the core of political science. So I just felt like there was a lot of crossovers, and going deep in each one helped you to really have that integrative lens that I think is important for all fields, really.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are some really great insights. I feel like you've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but could you share a little bit more about what led you to pursue your current career path and how your PPE degree helped you prepare for it?
I'm happy to start with that one. I think I fell into my career quite unexpectedly. I started my career in structured fixed income, which I don't think many people would have, decided they would go about. It just happened to be booming in the early and mid 2000s. So it's where there was a lot of recruiting, and that's oftentimes how things go in career paths. You tend to follow things that flow naturally in light of market conditions or something else. And I think that feels a bit weak in a way, because I think we love to think that we've got, complete control over this. And I think that the type of student who attends Penn has probably been quite programmed much of their kind of academic career. And, there's a lot of discipline and academic focus. And I think a desire to pursue a very specific path. And I think some people do that. I wouldn't say that I did that. I think I sort of fell into structured fixed income. I ended up working in M&A for a short time in the sort of mid-market, lower mid-market level. And then very unexpectedly, when I decided to leave banking, sort of happened into family office life, which is a very strange kind of corner of the world that I never would have anticipated being. I think where I landed working for a single family office and ultimately supporting the needs of ultra high net worth principals is a really well-rounded sort of, jack of all trades, specialist in none sort of personality. And this has been something that's harnessed my background in corporate finance and financial services broadly, and some of those more quantitative skills balanced out with more of the soft skills of as I alluded to before, sort of critical thinking and sort of being quick on your feet and being able to handle any particular problem that comes down the line. I think PPE is well sorted to that for all the reasons that we know, and that it's quite balanced, this classic UPenn interdisciplinary nature. So that's lent itself very, very well for me.
I can go next. I was a lawyer, and I had worked at a very large law firm and then moved to a smaller law firm and found that I was incredibly miserable. I loved law school. I loved the study of law, but it turns out I was not so well suited to the practice of law. And on Sunday nights, I used to cry about having to go to work on Monday morning. Like, I truly hated my life. And I was too young to have decided that I was going to continue in a career that made me cry on Sunday nights. And so as part of a New Year's resolution, I quit my job. I think this was like 16 or 17 years ago, and decided I was going to write my first book. And the idea wasn't actually to become a novelist. The idea was to write a book, because I always knew I wanted to write a book before I died. It was like a bucket list thing. And while I was writing, I was going to figure out what kind of lawyer I could actually be that would, not make me miserable. And then as soon as I started writing my book, it felt like the most organic, natural thing. And I knew immediately it was what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And then the question became, could I keep doing this for my life? And then I got extraordinarily lucky and sold my first book to Random House in a 2-book deal like 9 months later. And I've been writing full-time ever since. And that's been about 16 or 17 years. I think the larger message, though, is not to quit your job and write a book, because that is the stupidest thing I've ever done. It ended up working out for me, and it ended up being a magical thing. But for most people, that is not the way to go about doing this. But I do think there's a lesson in looking for the thing that makes you happy and brings passion to your life, and that keeps you from crying on Sunday nights, because none of us should be crying on a Sunday night.
Yeah, definitely don't want to cry on Sunday. What you said, I can relate to. So I went to Harvard Law School, 2 out of Penn. The reason why I went to law school is really because I didn't know what I wanted to do. It seemed like, I really liked philosophy of law. And so law school seemed like a logical place to go after getting a PP&E degree. And once I was in law school, I sort of figured it made sense to go work for a law firm. And so I did that for a little while, and I was there for 3 years, but after about a year, I sort of realized I was in the wrong job for similar reasons. I just felt like people I worked with were really nice. The hours were actually not as bad as I thought they would be. I was working with sports teams and leagues, which I thought was really interesting, and still I was unhappy. So I ultimately made a judgment that what I really liked about the job was working on deals, but I just didn't like being a lawyer, and I didn't have the skills to do deals from a financial perspective. And so I went back to business school, as I mentioned before, which turned out to be the right choice. And what's interesting is, from thinking back to my PPE years, I mean, it really did provide sort of a great underpinning for what was to come, because now I work with power and utility companies, and it's kind of interesting. The companies I work with are very much policy driven. It very much has to do with the way the government relates to the people. There's sort of a microeconomic element where a lot of the companies we work with are monopolies, like you would learn in Econ 101. And so, while my path was quite circuitous, it's very interesting how much I draw on that, philosophical and economic and political underpinning in my current work. And the only piece of advice I would give is, there's a lot of pressure when you're an undergrad to sort of know how this is all going to end up for you. Like, what is the career that I'm going to do when I get out of college? And I would just tell you that it doesn't have to be a straight line. You don't have to know everything, the way the story ends at the start. Just, focus on trying to narrow things down and try to figure out through process of elimination what you like the most, and then follow that. And I think, it seems to be sort of a consistent theme, but it's worthwhile, because when I talk to undergraduates, they seem to want to have everything set out. And especially in this day and age where, the economy is changing and shifting, you just have to realize you're not going to sort of land on your first job on day one, and that's where you're going to stay for the next 40 years. And I hope that's not the case for your sake.
So I currently work at the Federal Reserve. I've actually been here for over 20 years. I guess, when my career path did start pretty young. When people are like, I want to be a teacher, I want to be an astronaut, like I always did want to work for the government. I wanted to work in government. I actually in high school worked in city government, and while I was at Penn, I worked also in the mayor's office in the city of Philadelphia. So since I was about 15, I've had kind of a government related job. So definitely I felt, it was doing PPE, I felt would be like a real, give me a really good basis. I was also, in addition to working for the government, I've always been interested in the intersection between economics and finance and public policy. So going and working for the central bank was something that I always wanted to do. I will say that I applied every year for an internship at the Federal Reserve when I was at Penn and never got it. Also, when I was in my master's program, I didn't get it. But so right after college, I did go and work in finance for a few years and got my master's at night in public policy and wound up doing some research with people at the Federal Reserve, and I managed to get my job there. So, don't give up. Even if you don't get that undergraduate internship that you want, you can find yourself there.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you all for sharing how you ended up in your current roles. So our next question was if you could talk a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like in your current role and how maybe your PPE education plays a role in the decisions that you're making and what you're doing.
Okay, I'll go first. I don't know if PPE has any impact on how my day generally goes these days. I have 2 children and I live in Los Angeles. And so since I don't actually have a boss because I work for myself, I have to sort of keep my own hours and sort of make my job feel like a job. So I try and keep like a normal 9-to-5 life. I'd say the best, well, not the best thing, because there are a lot of great things about my job, but one of the best things about my job is I do it in my pajamas at home. I am on this panel right now in my pajamas with a wet head. I probably could have put on a shirt for you guys, but felt like I should just show you like how it is. This is how it is over here. And so I drop my kids at school, come home, work out, and then I go to my office, which is in my house. It's off my bedroom. And I spend my day alone in a room writing. And I think one thing I would tell undergraduates is to sort of think about not just what you're interested in, which obviously is very important, but sort of what kind of job you're suited to. I went to law school again, as I mentioned, and I loved law school, but it turns out I hate conflict. And I was a litigator, and being a litigator is all about conflict. And looking back, I don't know how I didn't think about that before becoming a lawyer. And I think I was just so wrapped up in the idea that I loved structuring arguments and writing that it didn't occur to me that there was this whole other part of the job that truly did not suit me. And I love being alone in a room all day. I am a real introvert. And so it's sort of my favorite part of my job is that I get this quiet time to myself. And then in terms of structuring, I use Freedom on my laptop to sort of block out the internet for chunks of time. Sometimes I do a Pomodoro method type thing. And then my kids get home later and I turn off my laptop and I start my day as a mom after the school day. Sometimes I have help a few days a week. And so those days I work a little bit later. And often I'll work on weekends if I'm on deadline. But I tend to structure my job in a very sort of 9-to-5 traditional way, even though I don't have to.
I guess I'll go next. How does PPE influence my day-to-day? My day, what's interesting about my life is there's very little predictability. I try, as I've gotten more senior in investment banking, I have more ability to affect my day. But I spend a couple days a week, depending on the week, on the road. I was saying a couple weeks ago, but in 7 days, I went from Charlotte, North Carolina to Madison, Wisconsin to Washington, D.C. And so, I think if I had to draw on one sort of skill from PP&E that I found helpful in my current job, which is just sort of the unpredictability and variety of it, is the fact that, in PPE, you have to toggle between different sorts of ways of using your brain, in order to get through, your normal curriculum. There's just a lot of different elements of it, which is part of what I like. And frankly, part of what I like about my job. I mean, I get bored easily, and so I want different stimulation of different kinds, and that's what I find in my job.
So I'm happy to go next. So maybe it would help to explain what a family office is. Effectively, my role as the COO of a single family office is to administer the affairs and a managed portfolio of an ultra high net worth billionaire investor who happens to run a listed company in the UK that invests in emerging markets. There are two principals. One is based in America, the other based in London, although he travels quite frequently. As a COO, my role is very operationally driven, but it's also quite transaction orientated. And I was just trying to think of a handful of things I was dealing with this week, and I'm happy to quickly run down those. So we're engaged in the final stages of a real estate transaction. We own a large commercial office space in central London that had previously been vacated for a sale process. And my view, in light of a sort of a downturn in commercial real estate in London, was to fill the building just to prevent the building sitting and being a cost center. So we're letting the property, and we're in the final negotiations of that with a very credible sort of public company. We had an IT breach in the last couple of weeks, who happened to be a bad actor at our outsourced IT vendor, and dealing with that has been a lot of fun. One of these things that isn't sexy, isn't exciting, isn't fun, but comes up and is very important sort of things to deal with. I'm running 3 hiring processes, 1 for a support role, 2 related to a hotel business that we own and that we back, an aviation solution for the main principal's private jet travel, which has been quite complex. He flies about 100 hours per month, about 1,200 hours per year. So this is a huge component to his day-to-day, including his work and his personal life. And we own an island in the Caribbean where we have an operating hotel business, and we're considering some significant CapEx to make improvements to that island. So I'm also juggling a cash flow model associated with that. So how is PPE relevant to any of this? I mean, that's quite an array of stuff in a single week that I've been dealing with. I think where I found this to be useful is that with a person who has virtually unlimited financial resources, the most valuable commodity for this person is time. And this is someone who needs very quick answers at any given time for any given question, and it needs to be coherent enough for him to make a very quick decision about something that pops up. So I find that with my PPE training, there's an element of being able to make an argument, to make a convincing argument to someone, to make significant decisions that may be financially very consequential or reputationally consequential, and be able to justify that and be prepared at any moment for any of those given questions to come up, and provide a recommendation, a solution, and advice for someone who is very, very short on time. So that seems a bit loose in translation, but I think it all goes back to this sort of interdisciplinary bit and juggling a number of things at once. I hope that's helpful.
Great. So I'll add in here. So I manage a series of teams. Some do operations, some do outreach, and one team is dedicated to collecting anecdotal information on the economy. So that means kind of real time, ahead of the data. We go out and talk to people who are out there, households, businesses, government, to try to get a handle on what is what is currently happening? What is the current context for small businesses? What is the current context for households in the economy? Again, a lot of crossovers with the major. I mean, a lot of what we do, the team goes out, listens, or collects sort of anecdotal information. And when we bring it all back together, the idea is to inform the policymakers at the Federal Reserve. It becomes part of a briefing that is part of something we call the Beige Book, and then we publish it. But when I bring the team back together, a lot of it is really kind of this integrative lens type of stuff that you would have learned, that you'll be learning in your classes. How do we bring the economics in together with the, kind of what's happening in the policy context. And then also, the philosophy of people and things really influences how people think about where they are financially and economically.
Thank you all for sharing. So kind of related to this, could you speak to any notable projects or initiatives you've worked on in your current role?
I'm happy to add in here because I think I just sort of talked about it, and then just sort of add on. I mean, I think getting this real kind of real look at the economy, real time, is definitely something that we're focused on getting a diverse set of voices, and making sure that it is communicated to the policymakers in the country. I think that's been definitely a really rewarding role for myself and for my team and for the institution. Since I've been here over 20 years, I have been, involved in a lot of our work that has happened during crisis. So, earlier financial crises, and most recently, I led up an effort for our pandemic facilities that the Federal Reserve created, and that was very rewarding because obviously at a time when my own family and my own community was going through a lot of stress, to be able to help set up very quickly from home in a week time frame to get support out to businesses in the United States, I think was kind of a coming together of all the things that I've kind of done. So I think that was definitely a highlight.
Yes, I can go next. I spend a lot of time working in what is becoming known as the energy transition. So I work a lot with companies that are either buying or selling renewable generation assets, or other forms of renewable fuels, which has been really fascinating. So last year, I represented BP, which is the large oil concern, in buying a company called Archaea, which uses landfills to create natural gas. And so it's a way to basically take advantage of emissions that would be there otherwise, and sort of use them for a beneficial purpose. And there's been a lot of work coming in this area of late, largely because of sort of the policy environment. So things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill have had major impacts on the flows of capital into my space. And so, it just shows sort of the intersection between politics, policy, and the economy, which is obviously relevant to what we're talking about now. But, one of the things I like a lot about my job is, I'm able to sort of be in an area where, we can actually do things that are helpful for the world, which sort of makes the job that much more interesting and exciting for me.
I don't know how to answer this question without just being self-promo-y, because all the projects I work on are just my own books. My most recent, I was trying to think if I had a pile of books. They're all hidden behind the plant. But my most recent book series is the Area 51 Files. It's my first, it's a series. It's going to be 3 books. And it's my first book for middle grade readers, which are readers 8 to 12. Previously, I've written for adults and young adults, and mostly semi-serious work. I mean, my books are funny, but they're usually have an undercurrent of, emotion. But my most recent book is a really fun book full of fart jokes. So it's been a delight to work on that, especially during the pandemic when, it was sort of a really rough time for everybody. And yeah, so that's my latest project. And if you had told, PPE me back at Penn that one day I would be able to make a living writing fart jokes, I would not have believed you, but you can. So if you take one thing from this panel, it's that you can make a living writing fart jokes, though I do a lot more than that, of course.
I think I spoke to some specific things I've been working on recently, so maybe I'll zoom out a bit. One thing, having worked in sort of a bulge bracket bank and kind of institutional environment, and, I think similar to, some of the others who have worked in law firms or at a bank, it's very hierarchical and it's very structured and it's very institutional. And in family offices, it's not that way at all. In fact, it's quite, it can be quite unstructured, quite informal, not as sophisticated as people sort of think it may be. And it's quite insular. It's oftentimes veiled in sort of secrecy and privacy. And there are a lot of concerns by principals around people knowing what they're doing or anything about their lives. And it's very personal work because you tend to know a great deal of intimate detail about the principals for whom you work. I think the unintended consequence, to use an economic phrase, of this is that family offices don't collaborate very well. So they don't play nice in the sandbox like their institutional counterparts that have been doing it for a long time. And so what this means oftentimes is they reinvent the wheel every time something comes up. So a lot of what I try to do internally as a COO is try to work with other family offices or promote the collaboration between family offices without having to sacrifice privacy or confidentiality or these sorts of things, because the likelihood that someone else has addressed a similar problem as you have or encountered a similar problem is pretty high. It's pretty likely. So I find that some of these networks, they pop up organically through WhatsApp groups that oftentimes are just social about, family office employees getting together for drinks, that kind of thing, and sharing war stories. And sometimes the result of that is that someone has a problem or a question or something comes up, and usually in that WhatsApp group, there are 5 people willing to help with a solution. And so I try to promote that day to day. I think internally, I'm always stuck between kind of managing principals for whom I work, and then managing a staff, a team of people, some of whom have family office experience, some of whom don't. And I think managing principals, managing up is always harder than managing down. And I say that because as wealth grows and as people get further and further disconnected from the real world, their perception of how easy or quick it is to get things done changes. That gap grows wider and wider, which makes my job a lot harder. So managing up becomes sort of tricky in terms of getting these kind of ultra high net worth individuals to understand what it actually takes to get done the things that they want to get done.
Thank you all for sharing that. It's really exciting to hear what you've all been working on, what you've been up to, and how different that can look like. So a next question that we have, and shifting gears a little bit, is if you could talk about any challenges you faced in your career and how you've overcome them.
After my daughter was born, I was living in London, and I had published 2 adult novels, and I was working on my 3rd. And I spent 2 years leaving my brand new baby at home with my mother-in-law so I could go to work. And I would walk to a Starbucks every single day and sit down for, my 8 hours. And I wrote a book after 2 years. I think I spent 2 years writing it. And then I decided it wasn't good enough to publish. It was a totally competent book. But when I put out a book, I wanted to be the kind of thing that you hand to your best friend and you say, you have to read this. And that book just wasn't there. It just wasn't fantastic. And so I had to put it in a drawer, which was heartbreaking and devastating. But I have published 8 books since. I have 2 more in the pipeline. And I think often about other people, when I talk to other writers or people who've quit writing, often they hit a point like that, where a book doesn't sell or a book just doesn't work, or they put out a book and no one buys it, and then they give up. And I think the only way to have longevity as a writer, and I imagine this is for every other career, is to keep going, especially when you fall. And so I love to tell people about that book in a drawer, even though it was incredibly painful and still sucks. And I could talk about how I learned from writing that book and blah, 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 but that's all bullshit. It was 2 years of my life that I will never get back. But I think it's a really important lesson that we just get back up and keep going. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a career.
I can go next. I mean, gosh, there are so many challenges that come up all the time in work and in life. But I guess, one of the toughest periods of my career was pretty early on, going through the associate years at an investment bank can be very challenging because you're being pulled in a lot of different directions. And I just remember, feeling as though after pulling a series of late nights that like it was never going to end and it was going to be like this forever. It's important to find people around you who can give you perspective in those difficult times, because oftentimes, especially when you're tired and stressed, it's difficult to maintain sort of balance and perspective on the situation. And so, those people really helped me get through what otherwise have been a very challenging time, where you feel like, am I ever going to make it through this period? And so importantly, I try to do the same for other people as much as I can at this point in my career. But, it just make sure to keep, keep your sort of, kitchen cabinet around you, keep the people who you care about around you to help keep you grounded and help keep you balanced when things seem like they're spiraling out of control.
I'll jump in on that one as well, because it reminds me of similar challenges from my banking time. I'd say I've kind of two examples where I've had bumps in the road that were tricky. The first was the financial crisis. So I was a third-year analyst at Barclays Capital. I worked in securitization, so you can imagine most of my team was sort of wiped out in that time. I was quite cocky, I would say, in those days. I thought, well, I've been working 100-hour weeks. I've been working really hard. I deserve a break. I did not calculate or estimate to any thoughtful extent how bad things would get. So I was beached for something like 8 months, which was incredibly scary because, when I came into the workforce in 2005, things were great. Markets were booming. There was a lot of optimism to go around. Think about how much has changed in the world since that time. It's quite baffling, right? I always used to think when I was young about my grandparents, right? Having been born around the time of, Great Depression, a world war, 9/11, they lived through all these life events. And I thought there's very little probably ahead in my future that includes those sorts of difficulties. And I'm not comparing these to those difficulties. They're just different, but they're significant. And 2008 and 2009 were very, very difficult. And I very much underestimated how bad things would get. And as a result of that, I spent some time kind of on the sidelines and had to really make up for that. So that was very scary. But like earlier sentiments, you really just have to push through. The second bit was around the time when I was sort of a banking VP. I kind of moved into a boutique M&A shop, and I decided I didn't want to be a banker anymore. And I had no in life with my career. I had no idea what, I'd spent so much time preparing to do this banking thing, and I did it, and then I didn't want to do it anymore. So what was I to do? And I very unexpectedly, from randomly applying to an obscure job advert on kind of a standard job board, that resulted in me working in family office life, which was a perfect fit for me, a balance of many different things. But that was also a very scary time. I think what all of this taught me is that, when you're young, when you're an undergraduate, even when you're fresh out of school, the world seems very black and white. The reality is that it is incredibly gray, many, many shades of gray. It's not this way or that. There's a lot of variability, a lot of different paths, a lot of different ways to go. So it's important to remember that when you're trying to sort out what you're going to do, or when it seems like it's difficult to know what to do next. It comes together in time.
I think elements what Julie, Eddie Donald all said. I mean, Eddie, actually, I also have 5 kids, so I'm not usually on a panel with someone else who has 5 kids, but
Good to see another member of the club.
yeah. So there you go. So I've had like a lot of tears, you know, like I was offered a federal political appointeeship where I took a leave from the Fed, and I literally, you know, my husband was like, you have to do it. I'm like, how? I was going to have to live in another city. I was going to have to move to Washington with my 5 kids at home. And like, you know, I'm, you know, very part of their life, you know, but he convinced me. And actually it's very interesting. Like one of you said, like your kitchen cabinet, it was my husband, who's also a Penn grad, Wharton grad's boss, that was really like, she has to do it, so I'll give you some time off, you know, so you can help her, you know, and you know, and my work was very supportive of it, but it was like what a difference that actually made, that my partner's boss was like, yeah, I understand he's gonna have to do a lot more. So I feel like, you know, you can't try to, you know, there's another question, you know, like, oh, how do you balance all this? It's like, you can't really balance it all the time. You really have to like build a crew of people who will like support your dreams. And like, you know, and even though I really didn't want to take the role, I mean, obviously it was an incredible experience. You know, 2 of my kids would actually come and like live with me different parts of the time. And now, you know, one's going to college, one's already graduated. And like, they look back at that as a really fond time because they were with me. They really respected that I was like doing this, you know, work. And, you know, they really liked, they were probably like I wasn't watching them. They were running around DC by themselves. But I think the thing is, the other part is, you know, I really wanted my career to move really fast, right? And I was, because we all do, right? But I have chosen a career where it is, you know, kind of it's a government thing, you know, sometimes it takes time. And, you know, I had to kind of really, since it was kind of a long tenured career, kind of take things in 5-year chunks. I would make plans for myself for 5 years. So if I really felt like I'm not, you know, I'd see other colleagues and like people were moving at a faster pace, kind of what Donald said, things change. I could say, okay, well, in 5 years, I want this. So if 18 months didn't really work out, I had kind of a longer view of like what I wanted for myself. So I feel like that was also a really helpful thing between my village, my tiers, my infrastructure, and this, I would always just make a 5-year plan. So if things weren't working out in 18 months, I had some more time.
So you all seem to have navigated career transitions or pivots. What advice do you have for students who may find themselves in a similar position down the line?
I'm happy to start with that. I would say you should think about the things that you gravitate toward when you're not forced to do it. So what are you doing in your spare time? What interests are you pursuing, right? And there may be hidden bits of that are not obvious. And I would encourage you to think about what that means and how that could be transferable to something that you want to do in life. I would also, you know, look, you guys have more pressure than we did in our time, kind of academically, socially, in life. We went through, well, I went through, right, as sort of the youngest panelist. My junior and senior year is right around the time when Facebook sort of expanded beyond Harvard and Yale to Penn and Princeton. So this is a very different sort of period. You guys have a lot of different social pressures. It's very easy to get on the bandwagon of all the noise about what you should be doing, what your peers are doing, what the path is, what the thing is. I would ignore that noise a bit, and I would really look at the things that you're doing on the weekends, you know, with your friends, the kinds of interests and things that capture you naturally, that you could do infinitely without ever having to be paid for. And I know that sounds cliche. What would you do, you know, for a job for free? It's a silly question, but there's something to it. And I think if you looked internally to that and you thought about what sorts of skills translate that are applicable with that to a potential career, if you work on that a little bit, I think you can find that there's something underneath.
Yeah, and I think that was very well said and poignant. I would just add, you know, be honest with yourself about what you like and what you don't like when you're making a career transition, because you know, while things definitely don't go in a straight line, you don't want to jump too many times, because then it sort of, your resume will read like you don't have a lot of direction. Again, I'm assuming sort of you're going through sort of institutional and corporate type hiring, because that's generally how you might be cast. So, you know, when you do have these career pivots, be introspective, be thoughtful, be self-critical, so that you put yourself on a good path for success in the future. And, you know, I totally agree with the point. It's very easy, especially at Penn, to look at people going into certain career paths and saying that must be the right thing. But it's not. And a lot of those people who are certain as to what they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives today, in 5 years, they will be doing something completely different. So again, perspective is important.
I 100% agree with Donald about phasing out the noise. I think it's really easy to fall to sort of that peer pressure of having to follow the institutional course. And for some of you, that might not be the right way. It certainly wasn't for me. I think it's important to bet on yourself and to know yourself, and whether you're someone who can bet on themselves. And I don't mean in terms of talent, I mean in terms of temperament, right? I have a creative career, and that sometimes is really tough. I don't have a regular paycheck every month. I don't have colleagues at the water cooler. I've created my own water cooler, so I do have, you know, a whole writers crew that I hang out with regularly and write with and go to work conventions with all the time. But it's not for everybody. And I think every single person sort of has to sit down and think about what it is they actually need from a job, not just intellectually, not just their passions, but also what are they good at? What do they enjoy doing? For, as I mentioned before, I'm terrible at conflict. So I was not suited to a job in which I had to get on the phone and yell at people. I don't really love a ton of responsibility, to be honest. I love being only responsible for myself. And hence running what is equivalent of a small business works for me. And so I think that's super important and sort of one of the pieces that's not always mentioned. And then in terms of pivoting, I think I've pivoted now 4 times in my career. I was a lawyer, and then I was an adult writer, and then I was a young adult writer. At the moment, I'm a middle grade writer working on an adult book. And this adult book is not purchased by anyone yet. And it's 100% me betting on myself and hoping it works and hoping that it'll come through for me. I remember when I quit my job as a lawyer to write my first book, my dad was absolutely horrified and was terrified for me and thought it was a bananas thing to do, which admittedly it was. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to New York for the Edgar Awards. My most recent middle grade book was nominated for an award, which is really exciting, especially because it's my little fart book. And my dad wants to come. And so it was sort of this fun full circle moment to realize that, you know, I did, you know, pull off this career that everyone thought was not the way to go.
So fun. I think this goes well right from what you just said, Julie. I find with my pivots, like if there's 2 things that always support them, let's say, is I think you got to do what you're good at and what you really like. You know, it's like you can try to do things. I mean, like Julie, I'm sure you were a great lawyer, you know, and Eddie as well. But like if you can do what you love, I think that works. And then also I think a constant and I think if you're a PPE major, you're probably naturally like this. I think it's important. The other thing that has really helped me with Pivot is like always in a state of learning, you know, always in a state of openness. And I think that integrative lens really works. And I think that, you know, like when I pivoted from being a sole contributor, which I loved, you know, but apparently I was very good at managing people. So, you know, I'd get one person and then they'd be giving me more people. And it was like, I was kind of like, this is going to be a lot, but that kind of love of learning, I realized that that works as a manager. The staff likes it. I can come up with things for them. So again, I think the pivots, if you're going towards something that you love and you keep an open mind and like that kind of learning, it usually ends up on a good road.
Yeah, I think that love of learning point is a really good one. And I do think that was sort of instilled, coming back to where we started, instilled in me in PP&E. You know, Donald, you said something about what would you do if you didn't have to work? I mean, I think I'd probably go be a student somewhere again. So anyway, it's neither here nor there, but trying to bring together two separate comments.
I'd love to add one more thing. Oh, sorry.
No.
Just very quickly, I just think we all forget sometimes that you're the one who has to live your life. And so since you're the one who has to live your life, pick the life you want to live, not the life all your friends are living or your parents think you should live or your community does. Live the life that fulfills you, however that may be.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've said this in a number of different ways, but you have to be really brutally honest with yourself as well about what you're good at and what you're not. So, you know, if you are naturally not sort of quantitatively inclined, if you have some aversion, right? If numbers make you nervous, don't just follow the, you know, the path down to, you know, moving to New York and doing the banking thing. It's just not going to go well, and you're really going to hate it. So just try to avoid those easy pitfalls. Be honest with what you're good at. If you got into the program, you got into Penn, you're bright. There is a path that exists for you. And there are a lot of paths, many different types of paths. There's not a right one. So you do have to kind of go with your gut a bit, trust your instincts as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that advice. It's really great to hear that. And it's also great to hear that you're all like working in different industries and got there in different ways. So we're also curious to know, what do you think, and you've been successful in your industries, of course. So we're curious to know what you think sets apart successful professionals in your industry and what advice you have for students looking to pursue that route.
I think perseverance. At least in novel writing, you don't give up when it doesn't work. And it often doesn't work. And you have very little control over anything other than the product you produce, the work that you write. And so I think the only thing you need is that constant ability to sit down and keep going. And also to pivot when your brain, for example, when your brain isn't able to write the adult book, you know, turn to the middle grade book or think about what feeds your soul when you're writing. I think that's super important. I do want to go back to one thing Donald said that I slightly disagree with, in the sense that I do think we shouldn't do things that scare us if we're not, like, be brutally honest with yourself about what you're not good at. But I also think sometimes the thing that scares you the most might be the thing you need to do. And of course, I don't mean if you're terrible at math, you should go be a financial analyst, which is what I think you're saying. But I mean more that, for example, I did not take a single English class at Penn other than my required class freshman year. But my roommate was an English major, and I read all of her syllabus. And I was terrified. I was terrified of taking those English classes. I was terrified of learning that I was a terrible writer, because probably deep in my soul, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so now often when I'm making a decision about what's the next thing I should work on, sometimes I let fear guide me in the opposite way. So this adult book I'm working on, I am terrified of it. It's a really ambitious idea. It's scary. I have no idea if I can pull it off. And that's sort of what tells me that's what I should be doing next.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to think what I think makes a great central banker or someone working in policy for the government. I mean, this probably just goes for any industry. I think, you know, you got to be collaborative. I think the way that we are, you know, working across most industries now, you have to be, you know, you have to kind of have that integrative lens. You have to be a collaborative worker. If you're, I feel like that would be like one thing that is that's gonna suit you well. I mean, also if you want to work for the government, it's a different kind of reward structure than potentially, you know, you're going to have in a private sector or some other kind of career. So you have to also be ready for that.
I guess it's investment banking is interesting because at different levels, the skill set that's required to be successful is different. But I'll just focus on the one that the level that I'm at now, which is, you know, my job is largely to manage teams, coordinate with clients, negotiate transactions, you know, and the skills that are required, I think and part of the reason why I think the job is so interesting is it's very qualitative and quantitative. It's about, you know, taking a look at a lot of different information and data and distilling it down to something that's digestible where you can provide advice on that basis. And, you know, you have to navigate complex interpersonal issues, both from a management perspective internally, but also client-wise. You have to be able to, you know, take a position and make an argument. You have to be able to, you know, form advice that, you know, ultimately is in the best interest of your client. Fundamentally, you know, I think what makes a good banker is somebody who can build trust and has integrity. But that's certainly how I try to conduct myself. But you know, it's a fascinating job because of all the different sort of muscles, you know, it draws upon, and that's part of the reason why I like it so much.
So I'll answer this in the way that I think about hiring people, which I think is one of the greatest challenges in any organization, doing it right. And I've got it right a lot of the time, but I've also got it wrong in you know, interviewing and screening people. And I think I've learned that some people interview very well, but that doesn't always necessarily translate. And I think that's something you should think about when you're kind of on the other side of the table. And interviewing is very much a two-way street. It's just as much of an opportunity for you to get to know the organization as for them to get to know you. So don't forget that. But these are the things that I think about. This applies throughout every organization I've worked for. So forget what type of organization it is. The thing that does not resonate with me, and what I have found fails everywhere that I've seen, is a sense of entitlement, particularly for someone who is junior, thinking that they're too good for given tasks or that it's not their job. It just doesn't work in any organization where I've been. I think self-awareness is a quality that I value very, very highly in someone, whether they are a colleague of mine, whether they're someone that I've worked for in the past, or someone that I manage, or someone who's fresh out of university and starting their career for the first time. Self-awareness is a really standout thing that goes a long way for someone, as far as I'm concerned, as a chief operating officer. Someone who can anticipate expectations does very well, because there's someone who's sort of not just looking at what's right in front of them immediately, but sort of looking down the path to see the direction things are going, what's coming next, and how can they be a part of that. That also gives you an opportunity to show some initiative and be proactive instead of just reactive, which can be tricky when you're starting your career, because you're still learning, as we all are, but you're learning very much, you know, on the job and figuring it out and sorting yourself at that time. But I think anticipating expectations and seeing the bigger picture is important, and not just what's in front of you. And lastly, I'd say, I mean, this is kind of the old, you know, Eddie will appreciate this, but this is kind of the old banking adage, which is, you know, the airport test, right? And personality. So if you were stuck in a layover for half a day, would you want to be around a person? I mean, look, you spend the vast majority of your life with your colleagues, different sets of colleagues, not in the same organization, but you want to be surrounded by people that are enjoyable to work with, people who have interesting stories, people who can tell a joke, who can, let their hair down and have a laugh and relax a bit, and who have something to contribute, who add value. So I like to be around people like that. It makes life more interesting. You learn some things, you broaden your perspectives, and I think that's really useful on the job, even though it's not necessarily applicable to a skill set. People like to have fun, nice, good people around. It makes a big difference in the workplace.
Thank you all for sharing your experiences with us. We'll ask one more question before we open up to the audience for them to ask any questions that they may have. So finally, what recommendations or advice do you have for current students trying to make the most of their time here at Penn and those who are deciding which career path to pursue?
I think this has been covered in various ways over the course of today, but I would just say, be true to yourself. I think something that Julie said, which is helpful, is I'll probably restate it slightly differently, but nobody is going to drive your career better than you will. And so take yourself seriously, but not too seriously. And, just try to think about what it is that you want to make out of your life and go after it.
I would say, like, where you guys are right now is like an incredible time to learn, develop relationships, friendships, take all, we've talked, PPE, you got to take a lot of classes, but take even more than that. I would say also, if you can fit it in, I think working for an academic in the space, I did that all 4 of my years there. It was an extraordinary mentor for me. In addition to that, if you can also get some kind of real life experience when you're also there as well. I'm just kind of like, do it all, because once you get out, it's like life happens, and I'm sure you all have to start paying your paychecks and paying your bills, and it's a different time. So I would, Penn's just an incredible place. It's like, that, but it like truly is. So try to, participate in studies, like do it all, because this really, unless you carve out some time for yourself, at least for me, I never really had that kind of time ever again.
I kind of second that. I'm like Eddie in the sense that if I wasn't, I would write even if I wasn't paid to write, but I would also, if I wish I had the time to go to school forever. I love learning. And if I could go back to Penn and be a student, I would absolutely. So I think my advice, first of all, is have fun and enjoy all the opportunities, because you're never in life are there going to be so many things for you to try right there for you so easily. So I would go explore the world in that wonderful way. The other thing I think is super important is to build your team. And what I mean by that is I am still best friends with my friends from college. We text and call every single day and have been in the, God, how many years has it been? 20 years? Is it more than 20 years? 24 years. Is that right? Is my math right? This is how you guys know I'm not a financial analyst.
Yes.
Yeah, and we've been texting and emailing and calling every single day since. And I wouldn't have gotten through the last 24 years, oh my God, without them. And so I would say find your people. That's really important. And also have fun. Adulting kind of sucks sometimes. So enjoy it while you don't have to.
Yeah, Julie nailed it with that. I could not have said it better. I think in my case, another example of that is, I met a crazy Dutchman at a party who will be best man at my wedding in the autumn, who has pushed me in my career, who is, my absolute best friend in the world, is like a sibling to me. And this is a Penn guy, right? and a colleague. So it is important to really harness that. And I think my way of saying this would be to put yourself out there. So, you know, when the weather is complete shite and it's a Friday and you just want to stay in, or it seems like a lot of social capital is required to be expended to go and do the thing, whatever it is. Just do it. Just go and do it. You'll be happy when you get there. You surprise yourself. I think we all have these bouts. I mean, it depends on people's personalities, but I'm quite a sociable person, but we all have these moments of sort of introversion where it just seems like it's not worth the effort. But go to places where no one knows you, where you have to introduce yourself again, where you have to explain who you are and where you're from and what you're about. You actually won't regret it. It does pay out in time. It pays great dividends. So I'd say put yourself out there. That's the first bit. Pay it forward is really important. I would look for opportunities to collaborate and help other people, not because you hope for something down the line in return, but because life comes with all sorts of twists and turns and surprises. So be kind and do well by other people. It actually makes a difference. It's easy to forget that in very cutthroat competitive environments like Penn, like Wall Street, whatever it may be. It's easy to lose focus on that. People can win together. It's not zero sum all the time, or at all. I mean, we could have a debate. We could have a PPE debate about that. And I'd say lead by example. And what I mean by that is, even though you're starting your career, you think, well, that's, you know, I'm in the lowest sort of rung. I'm not in a position of leadership. That's true. It doesn't mean that you can't lead by example with, you know, your fellow graduates who are starting a new role. Think about how your actions and your behavior reflect upon not only your reputation, but the others around you and what difference that could make. It can actually make a very great difference indeed. Don't forget that.
Thank you all so much for sharing all of your insights throughout this panel today. I think at this time we can turn it over to the audience if anyone has any questions. Feel free to unmute or put a question in the chat.
Yeah, I guess I just had one quick question. So we talked a lot about the soft skills and kind of like the liberal arts skills perspective that you developed in your PPE education at Penn. And I was wondering if you had any advice for someone looking into going to a more like finance, technical heavy career without going into a graduate degree to develop these hard technical skills.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I think getting a PPE degree is well worth it, regardless of what path you want to go down. So let's start with that premise. The second thing is you're fortunate because you can be a PPE major and still take courses at one of the best business schools in the world. So take advantage of that. And then third, there's lots of other resources like Training the Street or Breaking into Wall Street or other sorts of, you know, pay per use type of resources that you can also access through Penn that can make you financially proficient enough to perform well. The big point that you're going to have to address most likely is, and it's unfortunate just because it's the sort of the double-edged sword of being at Penn, is people will wonder, well, if you're at Penn, why didn't you study in Wharton? So just make sure, you know, you have a good story, which is honestly should be very easy to explain, which is you want to have a liberal arts degree. It's your only opportunity to do that. But there's lots of ways to get financially literate while still studying a liberal arts degree.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
I just add one thing, which is to say that one of my final round interviews was at a boutique focused kind of consumer M&A shop here in New York, and I was kind of the runner-up, and it's because the person competing against me for that one first-year analyst slot was a Wharton undergrad who was able to, you know, out of the gate, and I wasn't, and they didn't have a formal training program, so I lost that opportunity. What they said to me is, we like you, we like your personality, we like, you know, your leadership skills and that sort of thing, but unfortunately we don't have a training program, and that's the gap, and it's just the reality. So tough luck. I think, as Eddie said, it's about framing the story. That's really the most important thing. Have a convincing argument as to why you want to do it, what path you've taken to get there, and what's, you know, 3-5 years down the line. That's really what matters most.
Yeah, and realize, I mean, this is why it's a double-edged sword. I mean, between like Penn, you have the benefit of having Wharton. For most of the other top schools that are, you know, big feeders to Wall Street, they don't have business programs. And so you're no worse off than anyone else applying other than a Wharton student. But again, just be confident while being humble, and make sure that you do your homework.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, we'd like to end it here. Thank you so much to all our panelists and everyone who joined our event. We hope this has been really helpful to everyone. I know I learned a lot, and I'm really appreciative to all of you for taking the time out of your day to speak to us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.